Let's spend a little time talking about losing the minimum. One of the real keys to applying small ball effectively is the ability to get away from situations where it looks like you're in danger. By playing so many hands and doing so aggressively, you're going to find yourself getting re-raised a lot. And if that gets under your skin a little bit, it could cause you to veer from the central concept that makes small ball effective. While you want to be the aggressor at the table, when someone plays back at you, you should be extremely cautious about continuing with the hand unless your hand is very strong or you strongly suspect that your opponent is bluffing you. Before the flop, we talked about folding to re-raises, and the same applies after the flop. Let's look at an example. You raise before the flop with pocket eights, and only the big blind called the raise. Now the flop comes Jack 6-4. Your opponent checks to you, and you bet about 65% of the pot. Now your opponent check raises you on the flop. These are tricky situations. The main reason this is a more difficult decision than it might otherwise be is that your opponents are more likely to raise you with weaker hands if you were playing lots of hands and betting the flop consistently. Depending on your opponent, he could have any of the hands you see here. Top pair or better, a flush and or straight draw, a pair lower than eights, ace high, absolutely nothing. How you proceed from this point on obviously depends on your read, but I would strongly advise you to lean towards folding. Yes, while it's true that your opponents are more likely to be making plays against you, you don't want to be playing the guessing game in marginal situations for large percentages of your chip count. Also, the pocket eights just don't play all that well after the flop. In fact, in this situation, you'd be much better off with a hand like King 6. Almost as good as pocket eights, only with the King 6, you'd have 5 outs to improve your hand rather than just 2 eights. You are going to get bluffed from time to time. If you don't, well, then you simply aren't trying to play all that well. The goal with the small ball approach is to look for high percentage opportunities to play big pots and avoid playing big pots that require a lot of guesswork. While that might seem easily exploitable, that's just not the case. Players will often try to use a counter strategy of forcing you to play big pots by overbetting the pot. With that strategy, though, your opponents will be risking a higher percentage of his chips on his bluffs. When you do have a strong hand, he'll be giving you extra action by overbetting the pot. I can't stress enough how important it is to keep your composure when playing small ball. You'll go through streaks when you get raised time and time again. Don't crack. Have faith in the system, and a good opportunity will usually present itself. I've seen far too many good, young players go broke after being re-raised and bullied a few hands in a row. Eventually, the young player gets fed up with it all and then makes a move at the wrong pot and heads for the exit sign. Let's illustrate a situation where that could happen to you. You make it 500 to go with ace-jack, and the small blind re-raises you to 2,000. This is the 4th hand in a row that you've been raised before the flop, and out of frustration, you decide to make the call. That's mistake number 1. Generally speaking, if you've been re-raised 3 times in a row, and then a player re-raises you again after that, he's going to have an even stronger hand. Calling a re-raise with ace-jack is already a bad play, but in this case, it's even worse. So anyway, now you've made it to the flop, and it comes queen-jack 4. Your opponent hesitates and finally checks. You decide to bet 3,000 with your pair of jacks, and now the raiser goes all in for 7,000 more. Now, it's pretty clear that you should fold your hand in this case, but if you allow your mind to play tricks on you, you may find yourself looking for any excuse to think your opponent is bluffing. So you make the call and are drawing dead when your opponent turns over pocket queens. Oops! An oops that could have been avoided if you kept your composure either before the flop or after it. Here is probably the best advice I could ever give you when it comes to no-limit hold'em tournament poker. People don't bluff nearly as much as you think they do. Pros win because they play big pots with the best hand, not because they use super advanced bluffing strategies. Pros win because they depend on the fact that you just won't believe them. In order for a pro to cultivate that wild image, he may choose to play lots of hands, giving off the impression that he's doing a lot of wild bluffing. Watch a little closer, though. Sure, the pro may be raising tons of hands before the flop, but notice what happens when the big money goes in after the flop. Look at the type of hands a pro will turn over when everything is on the line. You can be sure that it's generally a premium hand, not some random bluff with no chance to improve. Pros will bluff with drawing hands, but you'll rarely see a pro get all of his money in on a flop of ace-king 4 with a hand like 8-9 suited. Those types of plays are for the amateur player. If a pro were to get his money all in on this type of a flop, you can expect to see at least aces and kings. In order to become a top professional, there was one essential variable for success that can't really be taught: discipline. This becomes even more prevalent if you choose to apply the small ball strategy. Playing this way is a double-edged sword. On one hand, You'll create more action for yourself and get your premium hands paid off more regularly, but at the same time, it will invite people to bluff you more often as well. As you improve as a player, you'll welcome those weak bluffs when you become more apt at sniffing them out. In the meantime, be content with letting the odd pot go to a bluffing opponent. If he keeps that up, you'll hopefully be able to trap him for a much bigger pot down the road.